Hello and welcome to Impactful Conversations, the podcast where we look at all sorts of topics that help you as an individual inside an organisation have greater impact and hopefully greater enjoyment in your role. And we're back on for another really interesting session today with a guest and somebody that I've known now for two years this month, Amy Baxendale. Amy, it's really lovely to see you and thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, lovely to see you as always, Glenn. Thank you. Great to be here.
Great. Well, and we should also add to listeners who aren't aware that you're based in Australia. So you're at the completely opposite end of your day today. So even more gratitude from Nejmi and I to you for joining us in what's not probably the most convenient of times. So really appreciate it.
My accent doesn't give that away, but yes, I am.
Nejmi, good to see you, sir. How are you?
Likewise. Yeah, very well. Thank you, Glenn. And delighted, Amy, to welcome you to our podcast today. Really looking forward to getting into the topics that we're going to explore. Perhaps one thing that was really interesting for me coming into this conversation is, bringing to life a little bit of the reality of, forging and crafting a skills-powered organization. But in particular, I think, Amy, it would be good to explore, what leadership means in that context and bring that to life a little bit for our listeners too. But perhaps before we dive into that, maybe it'd be useful, Amy, just to get a very quick background on how you've arrived to where you are and what you focus on in your work, in your career, and in your leadership as well. And then maybe we can also bring to life what is a skills-powered organization. What's an approach that brings that to life?
Yeah, I'd particularly appreciate that definition. Definitely.
You can, no worries. So I guess I'm over 20 years in the people and culture arena, always predominantly in more of the kind of talent development, leadership development, culture kind of side of things. Done a bit of the dark side of HR, been HR director for a bit as well. But the last few years I've been leading capability development and our skills powered organization journey globally. More recently, I've moved into global future of workforce director role. So very much looking at what are the skills we need in the future? How do we prepare our people and therefore our business to future proof us for the future? So yeah, various roles in the people function. Originally from the UK, as I say, my accent probably shows. I spent 4.5 years in the Middle East and been down here in Australia for the last 9 years. So some diversity in locations, but and experience, but broadly in the fun side of the people too. SPO is I will do that. Skills powered organisation. Glenn, you all know we use acronyms all the time. Skills powered organisation. Apologies if I do fall into SPO. Is a kind of term we've coined at Arcadis, but skills-based organisations is probably a broader term for the same thing. I think for me, it's fundamentally it's not about implementing new technology. Many SPO skills-powered programs are supported by technology, but fundamentally it's about people. It really is a huge culture change. I think the way I think about it is it's fundamentally rethinking how we lead, how we learn, and how we work together, and really having skills underpinning not just the people processes in an organisation, but actually skills underpinning all your workflows. Because really embedding it in all workflows is what truly is the epitome of bringing it to life, sort of thing.
Okay, excellent. And before we jumped on and started recording, you were talking about how much of a shift, culturally that means for an organization. What does it mean for leadership in driving an organization in this way?
Yeah, I think for me, to be honest, leadership in a skills-powered organisation is really just a reflection of what we need to do to reimagine leadership in the changing world of work. We all know we're in a very dynamic and changing world now. And so, yes, I can talk about it from an SPO perspective, but probably it's actually, even if your organisation's not on the skills journey, leaders of today need to recognise that there is a need for them to evolve. I think for me, leadership today it's all about guiding through rapid transformation, right? And whether that transformation is to be a skills-powered organisation or whether that transformation is to a completely different way you operate as a business. I think everyone's going through transformation there. For me, leadership is about thinking about the evolution around that. I think one of the things we often talk about is that I think leaders now have quite a lot of paradoxes they need to navigate. You know, they need to create stability as well as agility. They need to be really human-centered whilst also really driving digital change. So they've got to think paradoxically, but also navigate ambiguity and ultimately thrive in an age of what is continued disruption. And I think there's a lot more focus now on leaders to really kind of anticipate more forces and trends and signals to enable them to prepare our people for how we work, the workforce and the work styles of the, you know, next 1 to 5 years time sort of thing. I think for me, first and foremost, it's probably about leaders being able to really embrace change and being role models for continuous learning. I often talk about, and sorry, Glenn, you've heard me talk about this before, but leaders not only need to learn, but they also need to unlearn a lot of what served them well in the past. I think that's a big piece, that things that you've relied on aren't necessarily, you know, relevant moving forward. And I think it's moving from leaders sort of setting a direction to actually being responsible for creating more of the conditions where people and technology can thrive together, and people can have a more personalized experience at work. So it's quite broad in that regard.
Wow.
But I think if I think about it as skills powered more specifically, like I said at the sort of start, it is ultimately around a people and culture change, and it's ultimately about leaders needing to own it from the front. And again, it's like with any transformation, leaders cast a long shadow, and it is that advocacy, the authenticity, the kind of visible commitment that are enablers for success in any program. This is just a program, but any sort of change transformation program like that, it is that changing mindsets, changing wider ways of working. That's critical. And I think you mentioned it earlier, Glenn. I can't remember if we started recording at that point, but it's that letting go of those legacy mindsets. And I think there's a lot of legacy mindsets around kind of hierarchy, control, permanence of people and roles, and that kind of thing. And I was actually talking to Gartner a couple of weeks ago. We had a really interesting conversation around AI native organizations and how they have a real advantage here, because they're building from the ground up flexibility and agility without those rigid organizational structures. And whilst they don't probably call it a skills powered organization, by their very nature, they are skills powered, because they're thinking from the start, what can humans do? What can AI agents do? And how can they make the most of those? And it's not about job titles or seniority, which is obviously a big shift from some of the traditional organizations that we're probably all part of. So yeah, I think it's leader mindset, to be honest, is the biggest bit. It's those who can let go of that control and authority and really trust teams and the broader organization, and will drive that learning and growth and data-driven decisions, etc. I think that for me is what's at the heart of transformation from a leadership perspective.
That's absolutely fascinating. I often think about this idea of like change agility, like being able to create and enable agility in how, you know, teams are thinking and how, you know, teams are operating. And this idea of like identity and like letting go of like labels or titles, and actually focusing on like, well, what do we need and how do we need to adapt in order to drive forward, is a really, I think, a really critical point that you've just described there, Amy.
And that's utopia, right? We've got a long way, and I think most organisations on the journey have got a long way to get to that true utopia there. Sorry, Glenn.
No, I was going to, because utopia is an interesting word, right? So how do you, either in your experience or how are you planning to, if you're not quite at that stage yet, how do you expect to help leaders see that vision and actually really importantly embrace it? Because I think if I was a leader in an organization and I was looking at maybe less ownership in the traditional sense of a team and more about coordinating skill sets and understanding the future of work, that would feel even less certain in an already uncertain world. So how do you help me? How do you support me to see the vision and then be comfortable in some of the letting go? Because that's, at scale, if you've got, the organization you work for has got 36,000 people in it, that's of which a good proportion of managers and leaders. I could see that being a real, not for your organization particularly, but for all organizations, leaders who are just going, oh no, I'm hoping this, if I keep my head down, it will just go away.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think short answer to the question, Glenn, is it's why we very much position this, and I encourage anyone who's thinking about something like this, it's a human-centered change program. It's not a technology implementation do you know what I mean? It really is about meeting leaders where they're at, creating that vision, helping them to see the art of the possible, putting it in the what's in it for them and for their teams. You know, it's classic. It is sort of the classic change management piece, and also just really using them and their stories to encourage each other. And, you know, what you do start to see is when people are hearing it from their peers as leaders and they're hearing their peers talk about the benefits and such, like, they then are more, you know, intrigued and interested in wanting to get involved type thing. So don't get me wrong, it's a long journey, and there's a lot of really inbuilt, you know, it's all people have known in terms of their leadership style. And also, I'll probably talk about this a bit later as well, but there's also a piece around, you know, how people are measured. It's still in a world which is make the most of your talent, you know, in a world that we're in where it's a sort of more a billability driven, utilization driven sort of organization. Yeah, it is a shift both in terms of how people are incentivized and rewarded, as well as the more qualitative expectations on them as well.
Yeah, and you've sparked another question for me that, as you were just speaking early on about the change program element of it and the cultural change bit being human-centered, which I think is fab, and you know, we use that kind of language on the podcast a lot. How do you avoid, probably not it's a bit of a clumsy question, but how do you avoid shifting towards this kind of approach and shifting this leadership approach? How do you avoid it looking like the latest people program what's the right word? Program initiative. Or initiative. Yeah, initiative, exactly. That than something that is strategically vital for the future success of the business. I'd love to understand that a bit.
Yeah, no, it's obviously something absolutely at the heart of how we've kind of approached this. And I think fundamentally it's starting with a true business need, but it's a true business need really specific and relevant to your organisation. I think lots of people ask me our why, but our why is very different to your why, which is very different to another organisation's why, right? It's just got to be about relevance to your organisation, I think. So we started just thinking about this journey about this time in 2022. And it kind of started because I was hearing pain points across the business. It was talent shortages, it was skill mismatches, it was slow adoption of automation from our people, kind of resistance, I guess, to change. Yep. We were continuing to grow through acquisition and needed to understand the capabilities and skills coming into the business. We had retention risks. So all of this was kind of real business problems I was hearing and experiencing. And at the same time, like you keep track of all of sort of the latest trends in the market, and you're seeing that, you know, there's a lot of opportunities coming through with AI and skills-based kind of opportunity. So it's kind of, I connected the dots and kind of created a narrative that showed how moving to a kind of skills cloud approach could directly address those key business pain points. And it's just constantly talking about those key business pain points. I think I first presented it to the CPO and the CEO and positioned it very much as a way to solve those real business problems, not, to your point, Glenn, as an abstract people team initiative sort of thing. Yeah. And I suppose that then leads on to the most important point, which is from the start, we've said this is a business-led program. It's not a people-led program. And so immediately we had leaders from our client-facing businesses. They're the primary advocates, and it was actually them who took the whole proposal in the end to the full executive team to say we need to do this in order for us to be successful. So I think that shift in ownership is what helps make it that strategic priority. And what we also did there was we called it a business case light. So we couldn't do a full costed business case at the time because we didn't know who the partners would be, the costs, all that kind of thing. But it was a really focused, benefits-driven proposal, but it outlined the benefits and the potential value to different stakeholder groups so that they could all see it as a strategic priority from their perspective, if that makes sense. Yeah. And alongside more the business side, it was also tech and procurement and privacy and legal. Like, they're all on your speed dial, right, during this whole process, because they're also core enablers to it as well. But I'll be honest, I think we're very privileged in the fact that ultimately top level sponsorship for us was a real game changer. So our CEO not only was a massive, active, visible supporter, but he then made it part of our core 3-year business strategy. So that just signals to the entire organization, right? This isn't a people program. This is critical for our success. So that, I'm not going to lie, not everybody has the privilege of that, but that is a big game changer was a big game changer for us. So I think for me, if we want our leaders to see strategic, it's speaking their language, it's solving their problems, it's giving them ownership, because ultimately when the business leads and we as a people function enable, that's when things move. But I think going back to our conversation at the start, I'll be honest, we haven't got it completely right. There's still times it feels like a people team thing. There's days it feels probably like today that we're pushing water up the hill a little bit. That absolutely is still the case. But I guess when I reflect on that, they're probably hallmarks of any major transformation program. They're never going to be they're always messy. They're never going to be linear. They take perseverance. And probably if it wasn't challenging, it wasn't tough, you're not doing something as important as you should be. So I tried to take that, but there's a lot we've done to really try and get that strategic priority in there, but there's a lot more to still continue doing as well.
Yeah. It feels like, of course, what you're doing is large, complex transformation, and like top down endorsement and strategic, priority is clearly is an enabler to driving through adoption and change in that way. What else helps maybe in the day to day or in month to month to help leaders to adopt, that shift in thinking and a different, way of operating?
Yeah, I think again, I'll reiterate, we are on the journey. So whilst we did start laying the groundwork a number of years ago, it was only actually 2024 when we first sort of really, people started to feel and touch and experience something different. So we are kind of 18 months in. So talking about some of the sort of the philosophy of skills powered and vision, sort of deconstructing jobs, breaking down hierarchies, etc., we're not there yet. So we are definitely on a multi-year program, but I think ultimately we are challenging long held assumptions about work, careers and leadership. So to your point, it is about that behavioral piece. And just like with any change program, I guess, like some leaders naturally embrace it and lead from the front, and others are more hesitant, which I think is natural. And what we've tried to do, I think, Glenn, this probably refers to what you were talking about earlier, it's meeting them where they're at and kind of supporting them in that journey. But I think in terms of, I guess, more specifically, the behaviours that, support the shift, it's when that you see the leaders genuinely seeing the need to embed skills in all processes across the business, but all that, so they truly underpin the way we work. But also when you see them, encouraging mobility, recognizing rewarding skills, being transparent about opportunities, encouraging people to look for things outside of their own area. That's one real kind of behavior shift. But also then when you see your people like actually seeking out new opportunities, wanting to do gigs, wanting new experiences, again, it's that behavioral shift. But I think the most powerful signal, I guess, is when leaders absolutely take ownership of that change. So they're the ones leading the briefings, they're the ones facilitating the trainings, they're the ones being those visible champions rather than the program team doing it. Yeah. When leaders step up like that, that's the behaviour that really sends the message. This isn't just another people program, to your point, Glenn. It's actually core to how we work and succeed together. So I think that level of leadership engagement, it doesn't just drive adoption and buy-in, but it also builds trust and really signals it's a sort of shared journey rather than a isolated program. And I suppose behaviourally the other way, resistance can be really subtle. But one of the things I would say that most organisations on this journey, I've spoken to a lot of colleagues and peers in other organisations, talent hoarding is a really common example in a skills-powered world. So leaders reluctant to let go of those team members or very focused on hierarchy and reporting lines. And obviously that's a hallmark of change in a skills-powered world. Some people are just more comfortable with the old model, right? They're used to building high-performing teams and delivering results for their business units, and that's how they're measured and rewarded. So it can feel, I guess, counterintuitive to them. But I suppose it's meeting them with empathy, meeting them where they're at, meeting them with empathy, and using examples and success stories of your organisation and of your leaders where they've seen the change starting to be successful. So, it's very much behavioural change, though. It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, in terms of application to, let's say, like any leader, whether they're trying to drive like wholesale organizational transformation or just change within a small team. Actually, there's real learnings that you could take from that in just being very attuned to like who are your champions and who are your likely resistors, and just being very sensitive to meeting people where they are, to either encourage them to continue adoption and driving, being the signal that changes afoot, or being really attuned to understanding where that resistance comes from, and working with that, meeting with empathy, and working with that in order to avoid that being a derailer to the direction of travel that they want to see in their team or in their organization.
I mean, it's true stakeholder mapping and engagement, right? Like it literally is the who are the groups, but also who are the individuals that will be those early adopters, that will be those ones at the front, acting as authentic change leaders around it, versus those that might take it slightly longer. But you'd be surprised. There's people that you expect to be more hesitant, more nervous, more traditional, and they're like driving from the front, and others you think, this would be easy. So it's everyone's got a personal and emotional kind of space they're coming from, as well as a more professional work kind of space as well, right?
Yeah, I want to just go another step further than that, if I might, Amy, which is there any reason why, if you ignore the language and the terminology of skills-powered organization itself, but you embraced the rationale for it and the sort of philosophy behind it, is there any reason why a leader listening to this podcast who isn't in an organization going through that very specific sort of culture change program couldn't look at their own team, couldn't look at their own style of leadership and see, actually, there's some real advantages in terms of, if nothing else, engaging and retaining talent on my team, because I'm growing skills, I'm giving them different opportunities, maybe a secondment on another team, whatever it happens to be. And any particular reason why an individual couldn't adopt some of these things, irrespective of whether the organisation is going through that change?
No, and I guess that's kind of my point to the first question. A lot of my thoughts around this, so it's not because we're on a skills pad journey, it's leadership in the world now, right? Like, people want personalized experiences at work. That is the reality. So if you're not, as a leader, and regardless of your organisation, if you're not thinking about how to create those experiences for people, and that does mean diversity, people want to, especially the newer generations coming into the workforce, they're not like people in the past where they want to stay at the same organization forever. They want to have those different experiences. They want to have that opportunity to have a gig on the side. They want to have that opportunity to flex opportunities. So I just think if as a leader you're not thinking in that way, you're not meeting the needs of a multi-generational workforce and the generations that are increasing in scale in the workforce. I think we've got 5 generations at Glen in the workforce now. And it is just, there are different expectations. So,
talking of that, I wonder whether I might raise the spectre that is AI, and ask you to reflect on the sort of introduction on the increasing presence of AI in this space, and how leaders might be meeting that, and what is leadership when maybe, we've got a member of our team is an AI agent, and we're tiny by comparison to your organization and others. How do you see the AI theme impacting how leaders approach some of this topic?
Massively, to be honest. I strongly feel that the leadership capabilities that matter today are quite different from 5 years ago. Obviously, there's some things that are the consistency, but I think things like adaptability and learning agility. I think you mentioned that earlier, Nejmi. Like that, I think you talked about change agility, but learning agility, the same thing, right? That ability for leaders to get comfortable with the idea that what worked yesterday won't work tomorrow, and that, as I said earlier, that willingness to learn and learn and unlearn. Growth mindset, we've talked about it for years, right? But I think that's even more crucial in the AI world, because we've got to see disruption and ambiguity not as threats but as opportunities to innovate and learn. So we've got to embrace experimentation. We've got to be willing to make those mistakes, because we will on the AI journey, right? And be constantly and rapidly iterating. So I think that's those things that we've talked about for a long time almost heighten in importance in the AI world. I also talk a lot when I think a lot when I talk about this around psychological safety as well. I think, again, we've talked about it a lot, but I think it becomes even more prevalent in the world now, because I think we need to help our people to feel comfortable experimenting, questioning AI outputs as well, like, being comfortable to say, I don't think that sounds right, but also failing, because that's ultimately when innovation happens. I mean, Glenn, more than anyone, we all know that teams that are psychologically safe outperform others and are engaged, innovative, resilient, etc. But I think, as I say, in a world of AI, I do think that becomes even more important.
Yeah.
I have a personal view. Others don't necessarily all agree, but I think leaders have got to be AI literate themselves. They don't have to be coders or data scientists, but they've got to understand enough about AI and digital technology to spot opportunities, to think about how they can change their workflows and, create more opportunity and efficiency, but also ask the right questions and, really importantly, make informed decisions. I think for me, I talk a lot about data-driven decisions, but I also think leaders need to be able to know when to let data drive a decision, and just as importantly, when human judgment is still needed.
Yeah.
I mentioned earlier I was having a similar conversation to this with Gartner the other day, and we talked about ethical leadership. Actually, I think it was a phrase we coined, being more important than ever, because leaders should be asking not just what AI can do, but should it do it, and really thinking about that wider impact of choices on employees and clients and society as a whole. Something I've quoted a few times, actually, I read an article around AI anxiety is really widespread. I read an article that 90% of employees have FOBO. It was a new acronym for me, but a fear of becoming obsolete. And basically, leaders have got to address that anxiety head on, right? We can't gloss over it. We've got to help people to see how AI can enhance their roles, not just replace them. And again, I think that's where that ethical leadership comes into play. It's about how we use AI to augment human contributions, not just automate for efficiency. So I personally do see there's a real kind of shift around it. But I think those leaders that are going to thrive, it's those that are curious, it's those that are flexible, it's those that are data savvy, but also still really values driven and deeply human. Because I think things like authenticity, empathy, the ability to build trust and belonging, they're really essential in this new landscape, right? They're important to help leaders navigate ambiguity and break down silos, but they're also things AI can't replace. And they're the things that drive engagement and performance. So I think those real human things come through even more in a world where curiosity, experimentation, ethical decision making is more and more important.
Yep. It feels like there is such in an AI world that we're sort of shifting towards, that very human-centered skill set becomes even more important in a leadership context. And actually, that FOBO that you were describing feels like a bit of a call to action, right? Like, as leaders, it's really important, if we want to create high-performing environments, that we're able to address, the fears and anxieties that our team members might be experiencing for the current context and a not too distant future context. It feels like,
but also recognise leaders. Sorry to interrupt you. Leaders are feeling it as well, right? Potentially even more so, because a lot of the younger generation coming through, they've only known working in an AI environment, it's managing your own FOBO as well as that of your teams. I think is again one of those paradoxes, right? Yeah.
And within all, so it feels like you've given us a blueprint for leadership capabilities in an AI world, which are, I think is a brilliant call to action for any listener who's thinking about their own, like how they manage self or lead themselves or build their own, learning agility in this context of, what skills or mindsets to really think about how can I adopt in order to have the impact that I want to have. But it feels like there are those paradoxes that you described, and those tensions maybe around I have all of the objectives that I need to hit, and the measures that I am used to and familiar with, that is my sort of day job, and then I've got the realities of how I how I lead effectively, which is all of this other stuff, which is about, driving forward with impact in a changing context. It feels like that's a difficult tension to.
Yeah,
to
can I just say that there's a couple of things that struck me while you were speaking. One is that all of the things that you mentioned, Amy, I would say are just good hallmarks of just really good leadership. So listeners can take some solace from the fact that whilst the AI bit is quite new, if you're a really effective human-centered leader, then actually not a lot is going to change. Was my first reflection. And do come back on in this. This is sort of new thinking prompted by this conversation. But the second one is, if you were fearing your own obsolescence as a leader, the best thing is be a better leader. I mean, it just, the more effective you can be at leading, I would argue, and the more that your team look to you as somebody who is helping them, developing them, enhancing their opportunities, etc., very much in the spirit of what you've talked about for a skills-powered organization, then to some extent, at least you're delaying your own obsolescence, I would argue, because you're being more effective in that context. Is that fair or a bit simplistic?
Yeah, I would say it's definitely doubling down on those human-centric pieces, right? Without a doubt, and I agree. If those have naturally always been part of your leadership skill set, which isn't always the case, but if it is, then doubling down on those. But I do feel, ultimately, you mentioned that you're already doing this. You are going to be leading teams that are made up of human and machines, right? And it is about and that's a very different approach to your directing resources to do certain work at certain times. So I do think there is also, as well as doubling down on those elements, there is also that real understanding of the art of the possible with AI, and really understanding how that human machine collaboration and interaction and teaming can really drive a change in the way that you work and operate as an organization as well.
No, fair, absolutely fair challenge. And I've under reflected on that bit of it, so that's really helpful. I think our last question, Amy, if I might, and Nejmi mentioned, or at least started to hint at some of this just a moment ago. How do you currently, or how do you perceive that you're going to measure the success of this? I mean, A, it's massive. B, it's really complex. C, I don't want to worry you, but that's your job. But how should we be thinking about measurements and measuring progress and success in this kind of context?
Yeah, great question. And I think quantitative metrics, are obviously really important, especially for an organization. You need to be able to show that return on investment of the journey. We got some really good guidance from our executive leadership team really early on. They just wanted 3 measures, just focus on those. They didn't want a whole cottage industry created in creating more measurement. And ultimately, this is no silver bullet. It's not on itself solving any one thing. It's a contributor to lots of different things. But of course, you've got to have those quantitative metrics, in there to demonstrate that return on investment, because it is a big financial investment, both in terms of time, but also you do. In many organizations, particularly larger ones, you are likely to need technology to support, and you certainly need change expertise to support. But I also think there's really powerful signals that are more qualitative and cultural. When leadership is really enabling real change, when you see those behaviors embedded in kind of everyday life of the organization. So when leaders themselves are openly sharing their own learning journeys, they're talking about the skills they're developing, they're experimenting, and they're sharing their experiments that they're running with AI, or they're sharing insights from, trying something new and it's failed, and what they've failed and what they've learned from it. I think that's a strong signal that it's a safe space to learn and evolve. And that is, whether you're skills powered or not, that learning culture and that culture of learning is really critical in this new world. Also employees as well. I think I mentioned this earlier, when you start to see them proactively seeking out new opportunities, volunteering to do a gig, going for an opportunity they might never have considered before because they didn't realise their skills were transferable and they could go and do something different. I think it's those internal stories, when you start to hear about people mobility and applying their skills in new contexts, it's those stories, when you see them being celebrated and shared, as an example, that's kind of another way to see you on the right track, as it were. I suppose there's obviously, most organizations have employee listening tools, and of course they can provide you insight. But I think for me, that kind of sustained adoption of new ways of working is what shows you it's been success. And it's kind of like, it's that, what is culture? It's what you do when no one is watching, right? So if these behaviors continue when no one's watching, that's when you know that people are talking about skills and learning and adaptability, because it's just become how we do things around here. That's when you've achieved that real lasting change, right? And I suppose, using the word culture again, it's when the culture itself reflects the shift. So those new ideas and skills and ways of working aren't just accepted, they're expected and they're celebrated. That's when I think that leadership has really embraced that transformation.
Yeah. I think that mix of qualitative and quantitative, lag measures and predictive measures, all of those kind of, that sort of range. I'm heartened, by the way, to hear that your exec committee actually didn't want a dashboard of 1 million measures, and actually nailed it to the 2 or 3 that they felt were measures of moving the organization forward. Because ultimately all of these initiatives, right, need to be helping the organization deliver on its on its strategy.
Yeah, I mean, you can, an obvious one a lot of organizations use is retention, but retention is impacted by every single thing that goes on every single day in your organization. So to say that's as a result of this is an unrealistic. Don't get me wrong, we track it. So we've got a lot of things we track for interest and information, but it's not that measure of success. Equally, a lot of organizations use adoption of whatever tech platform they're using as a measure of success. We don't, because for me, that's not success. That's you use technology. It's not have you truly has your culture changed to be skills powered. So, but again, it depends on what's important to your organization, right? And what are the things, going back to those business pain points, what were the business pain points you're trying to solve? That drives then the measures that are right for your organization.
Yeah, love that. Look, we could go on, because it's a fascinating topic, and there's lots of facets to it. But I'm also mindful it's probably near your bedtime down there in Australia. So
I might fall asleep with you.
It's been lovely to catch up with you, and also thank you so much for what's been a really insightful, very, very helpful conversation. And I'm sure that listeners will be able to take that away, whether they're inside organizations thinking about skills powered approach, or currently inside that process already, or indeed, and really importantly, if you're not, there are still lots of things I think that Amy's given us as advice that you can take away and change about your leadership, or adopt in terms of your leadership, that will make you more effective, maybe even delay your obsolescence. So that would be amazing. Amy, thank you so much. Been absolutely fab. Really enjoyed it.
Been lovely to see you as always. Thank you so much to you both.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.